Good morning, everyone. Laura, this is just a random clip. I was going through some old footage. This is the day, one of the days you and I were out there.
Okay.
It's just astonishing to me that people think that that has anything to do with being a steward of the land or wildlife habitat. But,
Yeah.
ladies and gentlemen, we are live and we are thrilled to have Laura Cunningham back. Just a wealth of knowledge. I actually was just thumbing through your book again. Um, and Jack looks like he's frozen. Jack, can you hear us?
I can hear you, but I can't see anything. Here we are. Sorry.
Laura, what's on your mind first and foremost this morning? Where are you at? Are you out in the field? You doing some nature work?
I actually had to kind of drive out here, living in rural cow country. We don't have cable internet. So I just had to find a cell signal. And I guess I'm just not into getting Starlink at the moment. So, yeah.
Is that Elon Musk's thing?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. I prefer to call him Felon Musk.
Yes.
He's starting a boy band. It's called Felon Musk and the Swastikars.
Yeah.
Oh, and there we have Sledge.
So Laura, I just want to, introduce you to the people who may not know you as the California director of the Western Watersheds Project. Excuse me. I keep saying that. Is that? Yeah, it is. WWP, Western Watersheds Project. Sorry, too many acronyms in my head. And you, Western Watersheds is one of the plaintiffs against challenging the Park Service's what I would say is mismanagement of Point Reyes Seashore, and that was a mediated settlement with the Nature Conservancy stepping in. So elk will be released in the park. Thousands of cows will be moved out, but part of TNC's strategy is also to have some continued grazing of cows at Point Reyes Seashore. And I believe you are now free to speak about that and your opinion of it overall, just to kind of set the tone here for where we're going to talk about. And you're an ecologist, is that correct? Not a biologist, ecologist, or is it biologist?
I lost. Oh boy, I froze. Let me cycle back in.
You're back.
He was asking about your credentials, and you have quite a few. We could mix and match them. Is there a fancy word that includes all of them?
We lost the connection entirely, right? She's on a cell phone signal out in rural California, central, south.
Yeah, she just tried to call back in.
There we go. Everything froze and the video went frozen and I couldn't hear anything. Sorry, Jack. So if you had a question or something, repeat, please.
Just for people who don't know you, you are an ecologist or a biologist. Please describe your skills and training and your incredible knowledge base that Skylar was referring to.
Yeah, I have a background as a wildlife biologist and ecologist, and I'm trying to bring some more science to all the propaganda. And Skylar, to answer your question of where I'm at this morning, I'm thinking about propaganda, and we have so much of it now with the country, our administration, and then it's trickling down. We've dealt with it for quite a long time with, the Point Reyes situation, regenerative ranching and, organic dairies and all that. So I'm thinking about how pervasive the propaganda is, but also how our group of, people that are like fighting for animals and nature has really become well educated and savvy about how to see through all the green lawn grass and the poopy cows and see that that's not what a park should be. So that's what I've been thinking about.
So, I thought you were going to go a negative direction. You're saying you're actually seeing some progress. People are starting to understand that that's not nature.
Right. I mean, maybe it's just, who we hang out with, but I mean, we're educating a lot of people. We're writing a lot of good letters to the editor. And so when I see the Nature Conservancy come in with this gigantic propaganda machine, which they've been cultivating for years internationally, it's like, oh boy, here we go. Rev up the campaign again to counter the propaganda.
How sad. I can't even get sad or excited about the Nature Conservancy. And that's one of three major talking points today. I'd like to tell the viewers what the major talking points are that we're going to make a strong effort to stick to today, and let Laura be the primary speaker. One, ecological succession in coastal prairie with cattle grazing. What is old growth prairie? Two, coyote brush is good. So sad that we have to explain that. Three, the Nature Conservancy is taking over. Yikes. Indeed. I'm starting to wonder, these ranchers that are suing to block the deal, I'm starting to wonder if that's not such a bad thing. Like, let them win, sue it, stop it, because it's starting to seem more and more like maybe not such a great deal. And I doubt if the ranchers actually want it blocked. I'm starting to wonder if it's just a PR thing to pretend like they're suffering, because ranching is ending. Ranching and dairy is ending, period. This is a nice way to go out with some cash in their hands, but the planet just can't take any more of the abuse. The industry can't keep going.
Yeah, that's like part of the propaganda too. It's like, oh, all of Marin and Sonoma economy is going to crash because we're going to, close some ranches and dairies in this teeny little part of Marin County. So I don't know. Maybe they're stirring up trouble. Maybe they're hoping Trump will come in and rescue them. I don't know. I mean, you guys probably heard the news about the two national monuments that Trump attacked, and then he erased it the next day on Saturday. He was going to try to rescind Biden's Antiquity Act designation, which I don't think he can do. You can't do that. Of
There's a lot of things
Chuckwalla
he
National
can't do that he
Monument. He's trying anything, but that didn't work. So, that is a worry that, he's going to come in and make a mess. But I haven't seen any indications that he even cares about Point Reyes. So we'll see.
But he actually pulled back from what he was trying to do with those monuments. That's not like him.
I've noticed he's trying to get into less lawfare this time and less lawsuits. It's not working, right? But Friday he put out some executive order that would rescind Satitla National Monument by Mount Lassen, which was a native tribal-led campaign, and then Chuckwalla National Monument in Southern California. And then the next day, Saturday, he erased it. And so they're still here. But, you can see where he's thinking. And it's just, he wants to punish California. That's it. And the Park Service. So in a way, I kind of feel sorry for the National Park Service, but also, look what they've been doing at the seashore. They've been working for the ranchers.
Thank you. I'm glad you said it instead of me, because I always say that. I'm not that upset. The worst thing happening with losing Park Service workers is that the ranchers don't have any more free help.
So the trouble here with demonizing the puppet is you don't address the root of the problem, which is the puppet master. So National Park Service can be, as they had been, advocating for ranches, but if you gut them entirely and defund the Park Service, which I'm not in favor of, by the way, you lose some good programs, many good programs as well, for heaven's sake. And then you have corporations who just run completely roughshod. If you think this is bad, I don't agree with Skylar that I see a future which is even far more dystopian than the one we have now, where it's completely corporate control and all media is controlled by corporations. And I'm rereading 1984 right now. So it's just like, oh my God, here it is. This is what it would be. You don't have to imagine it. It's been imagined for us and made into books and movies. So Laura, Point Reyes Seashore, what would you like to see? I put you in charge. You get to do what you'd like to do there. How would you restore, 17,000 of the 18,000 acres that's been now redesignated, which means it's called something else. The land is the land. It doesn't matter what you call it. Get the cattle off it, or some of the cattle are going to be removed. But if you were in charge, what would you do there?
Yeah, well, I'm writing a restoration plan for the coastal prairie, but I want to include some of the other habitats in there too. And so this is like a real world I know the last time we talked about my ideal, which is like no cows, get all the 300 miles of barbed wire fences out. And so what I'm really going to do now is, TNC is going to come up with their management plan, which is what they call it, ecological grazing. What the F, and conservation grazing and all their propaganda terms, and they'll present that to the Park Service, and the Park Service will bend over and say, yeah, sure. So I want to push back as the public and the owner of the public lands, although I have to say, they're unceded lands from the coast Miwok, they're getting completely left out of the picture. But I would like to do this restoration plan, and the first thing is just inventory what's really out there. And what's out there is little tiny relics of coastal prairie, old growth prairie, and coyote brush scrub, which is a wonderful long-term native habitat that white-crowned sparrows use, deer, rabbits, foxes, bobcats. So just go see what's really out there, because over the years, during all this environmental review, the Park Service has ignored it. I invited Superintendent Craig Kinkle out to see, I've shown you guys those little coastal prairie relics, and there's others. They're all over, scattered around where there are no cows. Roadsides, steep slopes, little protected areas. And Craig, we had a nice phone call. He said, yeah, I'd like to do that. But, then the litigation happened and he can't talk to me, and now he's gone. And it's like we have to start all over again. But just my first plan, number one, go out there, inventory what we actually have. And then we'll go from there and deal with maybe doing a little active restoration to help get those plants back in and stop the mowing and, trampling and grazing from targeted grazing. So yeah, that's what I'll probably have a draft this summer, and then, probably work with Turtle Island Restoration Network and you guys, and present it to TNC, the Nature Conservancy, and the Park Service, and say, this is the third party independent monitor that wants you to do the right thing.
Fantastic. And that's something that our, ad hoc consortium of activists and elktivists and park lovers can support and say, basically it's do our job of educating the public and stumping for this stuff. And really great that you're going to be in this, Laura, and willing to work on it with as Western Watersheds Project, and give us some sort of a blueprint. Because as activists, we can't just say no, 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 unless you also say, this is the thing to do. Take the fences down, let the elk free, and we can absolutely continually advocate for all cows out of the park. Even my stance is we need to support this deal and push it through, because it's many big steps forward. It's not perfect, but no deal is ever going to be perfect. It's not how politics works. But as environmental activists, which is what I consider myself, we need to also have a plan from someone who has no financial stake in the game, despite the ranching propaganda that says you do, and say this is the ideal, because there is common sense to it, which is, the land can heal itself, and a little bit of some active restoration, as you say, which I'd like to hear more about in a moment. But a positive plan that we can advertise for and put into effect and hold out to the public as this makes sense, not put more cows in to heal land devastated by too many cows. That's obviously nuts.
Jack, earlier you said bring back in a few cows, but I saw an email from Laura saying that bringing in some new cattle could be 600 to 1,200.
Yes, correct.
Which brings me to Laura's first bullet point about ecological succession in coastal prairie with cattle grazing. Even if it was the smaller number of 600, you're nearly already over the amount of native tule oak that we have there. So that's not a small number of cattle. And then the 1,200 number is large too.
It's all relative. My understanding, if I hear Jim Cota, who educates me on most of this stuff, the average is supposed to be 600, and they can have up to 1,200. And of course, that's way too many cows. It's ridiculous. And how do they bring them in? And how do they move them around? And collars and electronic fences and all this. It's so insane. Desperate to keep cattle ranching around. So again, I just want to, I have Jim Cota's voice in my head too. Like, Jack, shut up. Let Laura speak. So please, Laura, tell us more about, so you would, you're going to have a restoration plan you're working on. You would like to inventory. You're like, it's like a scientist. Let's inventory what we have now, find out what our baseline is, where we're starting from, and then a little bit of, tell us what active restoration looks like, please, for whatever landscape you want to talk about.
Yeah, and first let me take you back in time, like say 1,000 years ago. No fences. There were these, fountain-like bunch grasses mixed with coyote brush, deep roots, spongy soil covered 100% with, the fungus and lichen and moss. And then there were herds of tule elk, probably a lot, and they would, I think, migrate out of the seashore completely at times. Maybe, go to some of the bay shore marshes, then they'd come back. There were probably thousands, in a big herd. There were wolves that would sometimes, kind of push them in a predatory manner to keep moving. So this is like an ideal picture I have in my head. We're not going to get back to that because we can't have elk migrate into the rest of Marin County, unfortunately. So we can try to have this little chunk of the past. I'd love it if we could get wolves back in Point Reyes, but that's, they want to. They're heading towards our area, but under Trump, they're probably bad stuff might happen. It's going to be harder. But anyway, so we have these little like 1% left of coastal prairie, coyote brush, some native shrub plants, meadows, marsh edges, vernal pools, and the rest of it is, Eurasian annual weeds, Mediterranean weeds. And I know, Jack, and you and I have had some really interesting, productive conversations about, the invasive plant, the non-native plant. And I have a lot of friends who are against using the term invasive. And yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm actually not against non-native plants. I like them in their own way. They're medicinal, edible, they're interesting in their own right. And so I'm not like, I don't think they're evil. I don't want to just, get rid of them. And we can't. But I'm just saying there are these other plants that maybe deserve to have a little more room too. The 1% that's left. It's like 99% these little annual grasses and mustards and thistles and things like that. So my idea would be, we're not going to get rid of all the Mediterranean plants from decades of cattle grazing. But what I'd like to do, and my sister does this already, she works for the city of Albany. She collects seeds from the wildflowers, the forbs, the native shrubs, oaks, and then grows them in a nursery. And we've got that resource locally with Turtle Island Restoration Network. And then maybe just have a couple of little islands here and there where the cattle used to be, and have little islands of, help push those natives back to where they were, to help get those deep roots growing back into the soil, restore the soil, stop some of the erosion. And then maybe 50 years later, we'll get the biological soil crusts coming in. And this is like a healthy, living soil that does not erode into the ocean. And I'm all for passive restoration too, which is, I know a lot of people in our group are very, supportive of that. No, they don't want any management. And I'm definitely of the opinion, let nature restore herself. But I think it would make it go a little quicker if we could just help a little bit and plant some islands and then step back and let it grow. It may take a century. But here's the problem. So you have these little plots of very delicate native grasses and wildflowers and mosses. And, when elk step on them, it doesn't do too much. But when this 1,200-pound cow starts just standing there and pooping on it, it's not going to last. And so even our 600 cows, being herded in these, fences or virtual fence, shock collars, I just skeptical that we're going to be able to restore anything. And because the old growth coastal prairie was not adapted to herds of bison, there weren't bison here. They weren't definitely not adapted to having these fenced areas with cows munching through, and even if it's going to be the savory method of, we'll quickly move them through, and maybe Nature Conservancy is thinking that. So I'm skeptical. So part of my restoration plan will be monitoring to see what the Nature Conservancy does and actively critiquing it along the way.
Laura, you're so kind. Your polite manner of saying you're not so sure it's going to work. Come on. It doesn't have a chance of working. And you were talking about how the native wildlife moved through things without causing too much damage. And I've been doing what your sister's doing. I've been collecting native plant seeds and restoring. And guess what I see when I go and check on my spots? I see hoof prints. Mm. They don't step on the plants. Mm. Cattle do. And I'm not saying that the deer or the antelope or the elk is looking at the plant and saying, I shouldn't step on it. They just have a relationship. They have a relationship with the land and they don't step on it. Cattle don't have a relationship. They're commodity animals. They are not replacements for wildlife. And I want to give you a specific question because we had a little bit of is 600 too many? Is 1,200 too many? I'm thinking 5 are too many. How many cattle does it take to undo restoration or prevent restoration?
Great question.
1.
Thank you. How can the Park Service and Nature Conservancy can't possibly not know that?
Well, because they there's no motivation to know it. It's the Upton Sinclair quote, which I say now pretty much every time I open my mouth. But I want to go back. So to what Skylar said and to what you said, Laura, would you talk a little bit more in depth, if you're willing, if you want to, the difference between how a cow walks on the land, whether it's behavior or its anatomy, compared to elk? I guess specifically, I was going to say bison, but bison are on the land here. So let's compare native tule elk, which were restored, brought back. They've been there for thousands of years before we killed them all and drove them off, and then restored them in 1978 in Point Reyes seashore, with how a domesticated cattle, which is a European animal brought in, bred, as Skylar is saying here, I'm just summarizing and then I'll let you go. It stands and eats more and such. Would you talk more about that the difference between the two animals? Because the average person watching the show says, I don't understand. There aren't elk there and there aren't bison anymore, which is a mistake. And we'll put cows in, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, you practically answered the question yourself. I mean, elk are a wild animal. I mean, we look at them, they have long legs, a long stride. They're always walking, take a little bite, walk. They're weigh like half of a typical dairy cow. Maybe, beef cows are less, but they're pretty light on the land, and they have a smaller muzzle size. So they're a little more selective when they take a munch. And then you said it perfectly. I mean, cows are a domesticated for-profit animal, unfortunately, that are bred for short legs and maximum meat and stocky. They're not designed to walk far. And they differ from bison in that respect. I mean, wild bison actually roam much further and have this giant shoulder muscle that helps them swing their forelegs in a big stride.
And plow through snow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's interesting, the wild aurochs of Europe, the beautiful wild cow before it was domesticated. I mean, it was probably adapted more to like marshes, meadows, forests, rivers. I mean, it was actually on the Nile River, one caught like a short-horned wild cattle. So they were really adapted to standing like a water buffalo and, grazing on the lushest marsh vegetation and green grass, and they were taken from that niche and then bred into this meat animal that was forced into deserts and uplands and, every place, people could put them. And so they're not co-evolved with coastal prairie habitats like tule elk are. So, I mean, it's just like apples and oranges to me. And so when I'm sorry, when the Nature Conservancy says conservation ecological grazing will help restore anything in a national park unit, I'm just like, big question marks are coming out of my head.
I'm sorry, I just have to throw this in there. I try to do it all the time. I'm like Bernie Sanders talking about the billionaires in the billionaire class. I want to talk about conservation grazing, restoration grazing, regenerative ranching are all public relations oxymorons. They are the clean coal of the cattle industry. And I thought of this book because of this conversation today called Toxic Sludge is Good for You. Lies, Damn Lies, and the Public Relations Industry. This is what we're now battling full on, even more so under the Trump administration, with regenerative ranching and cows are good, and even groups called the Nature Conservancy. What a wonderful name. Push forth this stuff, which is all industry generated. And, welcome to the complexities of life. At the same time, again, I always say this in the same breath, I'm in favor of the Nature Conservancy deal as a step forward. Let's use what we can. Last night I met with, it's a longer story, but Cory Booker, who is a friggin' vegan in the Senate. And it's a longer story there, which I won't get into now. But, he's the politician in the middle, trying to work deals with corporates, with companies, with who I would consider the opponent, big ag and big dairy, big beef. But we are the activists who have to speak the truth, have your plan. And I love talking to you about the invasive plant issue. Invasive is another human word thrown in there to get people, it weaponizes the idea of restoration. So you and I, when we get into the nitty gritty of it, we agree on, I think, literally everything, Laura. It's just the labels. I'm hypersensitive to calling things words that the PR industry gets us to speak in the Orwellian fashion. If you take their language, it creates doublethink, and you have words like conservation grazing, or as George Werthner was recently reminding me, and for that matter, Ken Brower, wildland management is an oxymoron also. And you can restore a little bit, as you were saying. I agree with everything you said, a little bit of restoration, and then, let the land heal, let the land heal. The main thing we can do is first do no harm. Stop bringing in cows, which do damage, and driving trucks and, all the rest of it.
Laura, we spend a lot of time talking about the evidence provided by the ranchers of the damage that they do. I don't spend enough time talking about the evidence that the Tuliok Reserve has given us, because I've gone deep hiking into there, and that's where I can find some native plants, some that I didn't expect to find. And yes, there are invasive plants out there. It's pretty impossible for there not to be invasive plants there when the Park Service allows ranchers to not only graze their cattle on invasive plants, but seed non-native invasive plants to help with their commodities. But, we use this excuse about fencing and fencing cattle in as why they do so much damage. Well, Tuliok are fenced into the reserve, and yet it looks magnificent. The native animals can live amongst native plant life without destroying that plant life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Tamales is neat because, the more you explore it, you begin to see, and this gets into the ecological restoration is, like you start with this bare ground covered with cow manure, right? That's the most highly disturbed, degraded form of, a grassland, a prairie. And then it just so happens to be that Mediterranean annuals and mustards and wild radish and all that are very well adapted to domesticated animals, right? Because they've been around 10,000 years with humans doing that, keeping them in little herds and, so the plants have adapted to this highly disturbed bare ground with no biological soil crust, and they love it and they thrive. So, but then the next step, you take the cows away, and that's like the easiest management to start restoration. You take the cows away. Duh, but that's hard.
Well, thank you for that simplicity and wisdom. And I will take that at first. You take the cows away. Quote, Laura Cunningham. No, I'm serious. You got to repeat the stuff. That's what I learned from Bernie Sanders. Repeat it. Because that's what they're doing on the other side, which is regenerative ranching, Alan Savory, regenerative ranching, holistic management, rotational grazing. It's all nonsense, but you say it enough and people say, I've heard that. It sounds good. People want to believe it because it's so easy. It's just false. So we need to repeat the truth as much.
Laura, what is old growth prairie?
Well, and so let me get through the succession. So there's a whole different set of other species of plants, some native, some non-native, that then will come in, and it's called a seral stage, SERAL. When you remove the disturbance factor cause, the cattle, it begins to recover. And so you get these other plants that are, it's called mid-successional plants. They kind of like semi-degraded. They don't like a lot of cattle trampling and grazing them, but they can handle that. So you get that, may take a couple of years. And then you get to another stage of recovery, say, as you see in Tamales Point, where you get the coyote brush coming up, this diversity of different types of plants. You start to get native bunch grasses coming up. I've seen little patches. They do start to come back once you remove this disturbance factor of heavy grazing. And so then at the very end, you have the old growth prairie, which we may need to have 100 years to get back. I don't know. It's very little studied. And these are areas that have been receiving no cattle grazing, remarkably, through the decades of the seashore. And they're hard to find, and they're little teeny, a half acre here, a roadside there. And you go and look at them and you get on your hands and knees and you're like, whoa, this old growth prairie, giant bunch grasses, just a carpet of forbs and mosses and lichens that are like a little cloud forest reaching up for the fog drip. Very high diversity, very high structural complexity. We have different layers of plants from, the microorganisms in the soil, and then the shrubs, and then some trees here and there. Wonderful biodiversity for birds, mammals, amphibians. And so this is the end goal. And then, like Jack and others say, let it go. Just let it do its thing. Just stay away from it. Don't let the elk do what they've been doing for 1,000,000 years. So that's the old growth prairie. It'll be hard to get back, but we can see the stages of recovery. And it's remarkable to me that the Park Service is like, no, we don't want to hear that. Like the biologists in the Park Service, we're not going to even listen to Laura's multiple page comments on this through the years in the environmental review. So I'm just going to keep shoving it in their face. And, saying this is the science is here. And if you want to come outside and look, this is another thing we don't do when we're in the government. We don't go outside and look very often. Maybe we'll hire UC Berkeley Range Management Department to go throw a couple of random plots out there. Oh, there's our study. But right. Yeah, so anyway, that's my succession rant that, this is well developed in the literature over the past 100 years. People have been watching this in California. It's well supported by the science, but the propaganda is so strong against it that, it's up to us to keep pushing that back in people's faces.
You tee it up, we'll hit it down the cow devastated fairway.
Okay. Well, do you side with Jack in making the Park Service innocent, or do you think that they are active participants in helping the destruction of the park and supporting ranchers? And I'll finish that statement. If they do know better and are keeping their mouths shut just for the sake of their jobs, is that good either?
Having worked for the National Park Service, I was a seasonal interpretive ranger at Death Valley National Park. I married a park ranger who was career permanent, not anymore, but I kind of saw them from the inside. And so I think it's hard working for the federal government, hard enough outside of the Trump years. And now it's kind of hellish because you're getting fired and your budget's getting cut. So in that respect, I kind of feel sorry for them, because I actually have heard in the whole beginning of this in 2018, we had a different superintendent. What was her name? I can't remember, but
Muldoon.
Oh yeah.
Cicely Muldoon.
Right, Cicely Muldoon. We the public weren't having their backs. It was just like 100% ranchers, like, we want this, we want that. And so I have heard rumors that they appreciate us critiquing them, because it actually, they can, our letters and all that, they can send up to the chain of command and say, look, the public actually wants elk here. And that actually helps them. So in that respect, I feel sorry for them. However, on the other side, I've been very surprised how the seashore has really been kind of on the side of the ranchers. And I can't explain why that is that strong, that they're just supporting ranching as the, and they're, oh, we'll make this a cultural, heritage area. And I'm like, what the F? Come on, you guys. And just really siding with that and not nature, which is what the seashore was supposed to be, founded for. So it's complicated.
That's a nice way of putting it again.
See how much more diplomatic she is than you, Skylar. But, we need your fiery voice saying these mofos and all that. I mean, I'm not criticizing you for it. I'm just sort of looking at what people say and where it puts them on a spectrum. I'm going to speak the 100% truth. I'm not going to compromise F you for trying to get me to do so, to people who are completely political animals, and they won't make any policy statements. They'll go where the wind blows up, and then everything in between. And I did want to, the other topic, but I do want to at least speak it now, whether we address it now or not, is some people were talking in our group about, we need to set fires and cultural burns and these kind of burns. And I'd love your thoughts on all that, Laura, whether that would be part of your plan. Again, I placed you in charge. We do what Laura Cunningham says we would do your studies. I know, isn't that a nice little fantasy? Would you involve burning in that? Because this whole Native American belief that they manage the land in a better way, which for me is push-pull. What are your thoughts about using fire on the landscape? Humans using fire on the landscape now, today, at Point Reyes, if you were in charge?
Yeah, this is another controversial topic. And I know I probably have somewhat different views from some other people, including George Werthner, who I greatly respect, although he and I have some slight differences on this. And I have said this many times before, fire is a natural process, and the suppression of fire is management. That is a form of management, to actively suppress all fire. And as we see that, what was the name of that fire? The Woodward fire, that lightning, very rare lightning strikes on the Bishop Pine Forest in the seashore caused that blaze. And that was natural. So fires actually are a part of Point Reyes National Seashore. You can't stop it. I mean, thank God it didn't get into the, people's houses. So I also disagree with George Werthner in that Native American people probably were using small cultural burns for about 2,000 years, maybe more. And before that, during the Holocene, last 10,000 years, we did have lightning ignitions. And it only takes one every 50 years to then do a burn and, reduce fuel loads and things like that. So, I mean, this is my observations on fire. And I know it's completely different from a lot of people's ideas on what fire should be. So my restoration plan would include a component where I hope Grayton Rancheria and other tribes would bring their knowledge of cultural fire and I'm talking about little small spot fires of inches of flames. We're talking like little teeny flames, not an out of control fire on a windy, dry day. And I've been to cultural burns by tribes in the Yurok and Kerok, and it was expertly handled, and they were simply bringing controlled fire back onto the landscape in a very ecological way. I thought it was great. And very small little areas, very well planned. And it's like seeing is believing. So many people have not seen this. And this was a part of California history, and to deny it is not helpful. But, I'm not talking about bringing back giant fires everywhere. I'm talking about, maybe experimental plots here and there. And, the Seashore Park Service used to have a prescribed burn program. And fire, as a natural process, has benefits that grazing cattle doesn't. and this is where I really disagree with the Nature Conservancy. When you have fire, there are certain plants in California that are fire adapted, like fire poppies. They will not ever germinate from seed unless a fire goes through and creates the ashy bed and heats the soil a little bit. So, I mean, there's a lot of fire ecology out there that we shouldn't just ignore. And, you know, we don't have to make fire the center of everything, but it does help to include in the plan. And you know, Jack and I, we got into this with Tamales Bay State Park. You know, leave that forest alone, right? We don't need to thin the fuel in that type of forest. That's an old growth cloud forest, a bishop pine. Leave it alone. The people living in private lands need to do their, you know, fuel treatment clearing around their properties. That is absolutely essential.
Defensible space.
Right.
And
Yeah.
home gardening. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that would be a part of my plan. But yeah, don't ignore fire because it's a natural process and it will come with a lightning ignition, whether you want it to or not. So let's, you know, work with it. That's always been my philosophy.
As always, Laura, when we get into the nitty gritty, I just agree 100% with what you say, even though in theory we might have some, you know, differences, which is, so I'm kind of on the side of George Werthner, who's I would call him a purist, and he should be here to defend himself. We should do another show on this, Skylar, fire, and bring in Laura and George and, you know, talk it out. But when you say small study areas, well, that's fine. I can't argue with that. Because, I mean, I guess I have the notion that, let's say the Coast Miwok in this area here used fire. Well, did they use it to heal the land, which is what the Park Service and Grayton want us to believe? Or, more complicated, they did it to manage the land, to grow the plants and the crops and the trees that they wanted, which is, it's one thing when there's a few of you doing it, and it's a different thing when the National Park Service, affected by corporations, does it on a gigantic scale. It's completely different, even though it's both fire. So it gets really tricky, the ideal versus when you push it through these bureaucracies, what the policy becomes. If it was Laura Cunningham in charge, which I'd like, then it's a whole, you know, like, I trust you, you know, you're not out for some ulterior motive.
Yeah, and the tribes have had to deal with the bureaucracies of the federal government themselves. I mean, and the Klamath River, where I spent a week with, you know, I had all the fire gear on, you know, standing right next to the people fighting the not fighting, but doing the little drip torches, and they had their water hoses. And I'm talking that, like, they had a hard time getting their prescribed fire going because it was so humid. It was done in October, and they finally had a dry enough day where they, you know, got inches of flames to just crackle through, you know, this area to help get basketry plants that would, like, then resprout, like hazelnuts will resprout after a fire, these nice straight twigs. And so, I mean, there were ecological and cultural benefits that I don't want to just ignore, because that, to me, that's colonial. If we're just going to, like, erase the tribes, that's as worse as, you know, managing in a poor way. But they were doing all this on private lands because they couldn't get the Forest Service to agree to let them start healing these logged over second, third growth timber production areas. And importantly, these tribes on the Klamath River did not use chainsaws. They said, we're here to do a prescribed burn every 5 to 20 years. And if it burns a little sapling and it falls down, that's good enough for us. No chainsaws. I was very impressed. And that's where, you know, we should have a friendly debate with George, because I've seen it with my own eyes that there's a way to do this in a very low impact manner. And let's face it, the coastal prairie and the coyote brush here and there, whether from lightning or tribal cultural fire, for thousands of years. And it created a really nice mosaic. And elk love to come and graze on plants after a fire. It's like ice cream. It's like all this new green, nutritious plants. So yeah, there's a lot to learn there, but not just do industrial fire. That's not what I'm talking about.
I want to acknowledge a couple of viewers. Sledge asked a question, which we actually talked about in a previous video, so we don't have to talk about it for too long, but he says, we discussed the island theory. Can we use the current fencing, reuse it in certain areas for the study plots? I don't think we had a good answer for that. And then Marty talks about the difficulties in Montana. And a lot of people in California are fleeing to Montana to buy land and space and anything affordable. And if you're a nature lover, you're going to be faced with ranching that's going on there. But he says the American Prairie Reserve in north central Montana is a great project to restore and preserve the shortgrass prairie, but animosity from ranchers is strong.
Yeah, I mean, to answer the first question, having a little plot of restoration prairie that's fenced off from cattle. I mean, maybe I should include that in my restoration, and I'll be probably working counter to what the Nature Conservancy wants, because I think they're going to want to have take out some barbed wire fence and put in these either temporary electric fencing or virtual fencing, which needs cell towers and shock collars on cows. And the cows are supposed to learn if they bump into a GPS virtual fence. Maybe we can have a virtual fence area that has no cows. I mean, we'll have to see. It'll be a plan in progress. And then, some really nice work is being done in the Great Plains and prairies of the middle continent to restore grasslands. And I study that kind of thing. So, and the ranchers, they have, tens of millions of acres of public lands to go cry on.
Love it. Thank you, Laura.
We're almost out of time, but I'd sure like to get to your second bullet point talking about coyote brush being good. You and I actually did an entire video on this together out in Point Reyes when I first heard the ranchers calling coyote brush invasive. Jack, you have a problem with invasive plants being called invasive. How about native plants that don't even behave in an invasive manner?
This is the trouble with our popularizing the word invasive. It becomes a weapon which the public buys because the public is never going to be as educated. They don't give them that tool. Don't give them that weapon. That's the issue I have.
And of course, they are not invasive and they're good. Tell us some of the ways that coyote brush is good and why it not only should be there, but is essential.
Yeah. And I mean, but Jack, you bring up a really good point. I've learned from you and our whole group and, global politics lately about the use of words and how important they are, and it's the propaganda, you see it in Ukraine, Putin uses words like, that's mine, it's my right, and then I study how Ukraine says, no, that's a propaganda word. And we're going to use this word to counter it. Whatever your politics are on that, it's interesting to see. So I take stuff like that and I go, invasive it gets used for anything and everything that is not palatable to the cow. And so coyote brush is a woody shrub and it has some bitter leaves. And I think elk and deer will eat it. Ground sloths and the cows, not so much. They don't like it. So we have to do two things. If you're a rancher, we have to mow it, get the Park Service to agree to mowing. And it's even in the record of decision, they get to mow. Now, moving forward, we lost on that one. So that's not restoring coastal habitats. And then two, we have to make up words and then keep saying them over and over and over again to get our propaganda points. And so coyote brush are evil and invasive and they take over and, we don't want them around. And I just don't even know where that came from, except as propaganda for range management. Because, I think I mentioned this before, there's a natural pond in the seashore where they did a mud core and found distinctive pollen of coyote brush, 2,000 years. It fluctuates in number, but it's been a constant part of the coastal prairie and the seashore for thousands of years, scientific evidence. So it's a great plant. It has insects that use it, to pollinate and feed off of. It
There's like
provides
nearly
cover.
200 species.
Yeah.
Nearly 200 species require coyote brush. Laura, but it doesn't feed cattle, therefore it's worthless. I mean, no, I'm serious. That is the answer. Cattle don't eat it, therefore get rid of it because we want to replace it. Just like ranchers chop down forests and trees for grass for their cattle. That has more value. That has more value than trees provide. We can feed our commodity animals more grass.
Well, this
I'm afraid it's that simple.
This is why I go on and tell people what you can do today and every day is stop eating dairy products and beef. Don't support the cattle industry, because until consumers stop eating the stuff out of ignorance and not knowing any better, well, I'm a vegetarian, so I don't eat beef, but I eat dairy products. Well, you're still supporting dairy cows. And that's a whole thing ethically, but you support the industry. There's going to be a giant industry making money off you're eating those products, pushing their agenda and using all this language. This book taught me a ton. This is a woman, a permaculturist who used to go around using drip torches, burning the bad plants, the so-called invasives. Beyond the War on Invasive Species, permaculturist approach to ecosystem restoration. And she's the one that taught me probably, you know what? You don't have this book, Laura, do you? Okay, I'm going to send this to you. I think you'd be open to what she says. And she's the one that taught me how the industry, the chemical industry, weaponized the invasive term and pushed it through a lot of national policy making out of DC, and turned it from it used to be the Native Plant Society, then it became the Invasive Plant Society, California Invasive Plant Society. So you demonize something and then go after it. And it's xenophobia, but for a capitalist purpose, to make money off of selling this chemical. And of course, ranchers jump onto it because great, we can get rid of these plants that we don't want out of there so we can cattle graze.
Jocelyn Knight has a question for you, Laura, and she says, won't virtual fences and cell towers just add to more radiation everywhere? And how does that affect wildlife? I mean, I would certainly think it would deter wildlife from, you see all the articles, oh, the Tule elk are free to roam now. No, they're not. There's still a shitload of fencing out there, and they're going to put up electric fencing. But she has a good point. I don't know how much you can speak on the radiation or just generally affecting wildlife.
A good question. Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And my answer is I don't know, because virtual fencing as a range technique is really recent. There's a couple of projects I'm trying to follow in the Forest Service is putting up a virtual fence on the border of California and Oregon, way up there, on a ridge that is actually the Pacific fence on it, because it's the Pacific Crest Trail. And there's trespass cattle actually going from California into Oregon. I mean, completely out of their. Forest Service is going to put up, cell towers along the Pacific Crest Trail. And it's new. I mean, I think they might have just built it last summer. And I need to get up there and, take a look. So I don't know. It's a good question. Something to track.
And I got to throw in.
Go ahead, Skylar.
I just want to point out that cattle are supposed to learn about these virtual boundaries, and at the same time, people rationalize that it's okay to slaughter cows and hang them upside down and slit their throats because they're dumb animals that we expect to learn.
This is why Point Reyes Seashore is it's near a populated area, San Francisco Bay Area, with people who at least call themselves environmentalists and think well, even if they're horribly misguided and misled much of the time. So it's a microcosm. We can talk about the cattle industry as we're doing here in West Marin County to educate the population about just the blight on the land in so many ways, economically and ecologically, that cattle are on the land. Just stop eating the products, folks. Sorry, I always go back to that, but that's something you can do today. Listeners, stop eating this stuff and supporting this industry, which is destructive in every way. And my last question is, what the hell? More fences and cows and management in a national park? In a national park, the most sacred lands that has been set aside, make it a wild place for wild animals and wild lands? What are we doing? It's just so off the rails.
Yeah, I think the settlement got pretty messy and complicated, and the Nature Conservancy what do they have, 10 billion now in worth worldwide? just kind of came in there and, and like they do, they brought this fancy plan and a lot of donors and money talks. So it got messy. I'm not really happy with it, although we're getting rid of the dairies. So that's, we're getting a step up. But I think we're just going to have to monitor this. Our citizen scientists and groups are just going to have to keep after this and keep critiquing to both, who Nature Conservancy can get subcontractor ranchers now. So hopefully there will be some new comment periods and environmental reviews if they do some things like this in the future. But we're going to have to keep critiquing that, pushing the Park Service to do the right thing in a park.
Well, if I heard you correctly, so the ranchers that are there are getting a big payout. And now we're going to pay other ranchers to come in. We're not getting rid of ranching. We're just paying more people.
I don't know how that works. It may be that you get to be subcontracted to graze, and then, they're saying not commercial. So that's where, how do these ranchers, do they get a money benefit? I don't know. There's all these new questions that have arisen.
Okay, so let me out Skylar on this. I can do this on one point. There's no such thing as non-commercial grazing. The only reason you graze them is to make money. They're not like, I love my cows, I want to bring them in there and have them eat because I'm a nice guy. And then I'll bring those cows home and I'll pet them. And they'll sleep in my kids' beds. I mean, it's to slaughter them or to eat their milk and then slaughter them. There's no other reason that people have more than a cow in their backyard or 2 cows. And we're talking about hundreds of cows. It's all commercial. It's just such more BS. Excuse me. How's that, Skylar? How'd I do?
Well, I think you nailed why the propaganda works. These are animals that do not have an ecological purpose, but you tell the public that they do have an ecological purpose, and therefore eating them and supporting ranchers is basically supporting nature. Hey, we gotta keep having cattle, otherwise nature will fall apart. So do your part by becoming a diabetic, obese human being.
Welcome to our show, Laura.
Yeah.
Hey, Laura, I'm usually the one that avoids Jack talking about veganism, but did you not say on the last show that you converted?
I did, maybe it was 2018. I've always been kind of not much of a meat eater, but I tried to go 100% after learning about, even more. I've always been kind of an animal rights activist, but, seeing the organic dairies in action, and I'm trying to get rid of dairy too, it just go full on. So yes, we've had this debate too. Even if you do meatless Mondays, my God, what a gigantic thing you're doing for the world.
I remember your first tour in Point Reyes that I attended, and you opened up kind of trying to establish a rapport with the people there, that you weren't the full enemy. You said, I love cheese, I love dairy, but nature, but this is not good for nature. And I kept my mouth shut, to my credit. I didn't say anything about, hey, don't do that, Laura. But I think you just kind of realized on your own by looking, you're like, wait a minute, I can't support this.
Yeah. And that's where we shouldn't be too scolding of people. I mean, it's a vegan, getting into that as a process, I think. And, my sister even is becoming more and more of that just by, me blabbing to her about all of this and not lecturing her. So yeah, it's a process.
I want to shout out to Leah Wilburn for reminding me you can speak the truth about something without quote unquote lecturing people. Or the other one we're accused is shaming people. I can't shame you. I can say things that are true. If you feel shame, that's on you. I can't make you feel anything either way. Jocelyn is a great question, which I'd love to ask Laura. How do you feel about goat grazing in the park? Skylar knew to put it on the screen. Do goats do more damage or less damage than cattle? Is it true that seeds are no longer viable after going through goats' digestive system?
I have to say one thing really quick. Through my own documentation, I tell you that goats eat coyote brush. They don't necessarily want to, but they do. They are wiping out the little coyote brush left on public land. So if cattle don't eat coyote brush and goats do, and their goal is to get rid of coyote brush, well, shit. Then I guess we're going to see goats.
Thank you, Laura. What do you think, Skylar?
No, I'm done.
I'm teasing. I'm teasing, man. It's fine.
Hey, I am documenting this every day. I can speak on that one.
I know. It's great. I'm just teasing, my friend. Laura.
No, it's true. Okay, Laura.
Your thoughts?
No, I know, Skylar, you have been like educating me on it. And I'm actually against goat grazing. Sorry. They're another domestic animal that they have a narrower muzzle than sheep and they graze differently from sheep, but sheep do horrible damage. Goats climb trees and, like just strip vines and shrubs. And maybe, in certain areas, like I know East Bay Regional Park uses goat grazing right on the WUI, the wildland urban interface. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time going after them right on that. But I don't think, why don't we just use elk? Let's just get all the domestic meat animals and dairy animals out of there and get elk to naturally graze the natural, ecosystems like they have. I don't know why that's so hard to think about in a national park unit where people want to come and see wildlife. They don't want to come and see goat herds.
Well, I can answer your question why. Because goats you can make money off of. Wild elk you don't. Simple. It's profit driven. All of it. Always.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I like goats. Goats are cute. There's a petting zoo down here, and I always pet the goat and give it treats. So goats are cool, but again, they're completely different ecology than elk and deer. And so why are we having to do, and why can't we do a different kind of, if there's an invasive, okay, so there I use the non-native patch of plants that you'd like to get rid of, get a bunch of people out there like my sister does and pull them by hand.
Thank you.
Why can't we just do that instead of goats and herbicides and chainsaws?
You talked about them climbing trees. It's true. It's absolutely true. But not only are they climbing the trees to get to the native leaves, at their feet are the plants that they were supposed to be getting rid of. Like they prioritize consuming the native habitat over the problem plants. Look, I'm not using the word invasive. The problem plants.
You guys.
And geez.
So there's goats here. They use goats in Terra Linda here to do, as you call it, the WUI, the wildland urban interface. They ring the area of Terra Linda, which is in the flats here in northern San Rafael, north of the Marin Civic Center, to cut down the grass, which skirts the housing development here. So a bunch of Eichler houses that I'm in. And I mean, as damage goes, it's contained. It's about a ring from maybe 50 feet from the houses out to about 150 feet. And they bring the goats in, they electric fence them, and they eat it down to bare dirt. And you walk by and it smells like goat shit. Yep. That's what it is. Now, I don't pick that fight because it's relatively minimal compared to what's going on at Point Reyes and what cattle do. But it's like, what is the alternative? Because I actually agree with the idea of cutting some of the grasses down. They're not going up into the hills. They're not pushing the goats all over the place here. It's just this skirt around a community, which in theory, I mean, it doesn't really matter because if you have a wildfire, all the embers are going to blow over that 100-foot area apron anyway. And this is why home hardening is as important as defensible space right near a house. But it's certainly wildly destructive. To Jocelyn's point, she said, "This is what I observed too: massive destruction, as have I." And I
like part two of Jocelyn's question, Laura. If you can ask this, because I asked this question when I first got into the goat grazing thing, and the city just said, "Oh, the seeds are all rendered inert when they pass through the goat system." I'm like, wait a minute. That's a lot of species of plants that you just swept by saying that the goats rendered them inert. Different plants have different resistances to a digestive system. I have a hard time believing that that's just true across the board. Do you happen to know?
I just talked to somebody who told me this too, and I hadn't heard it before, that goats have this really acidic stomach that like kills seeds as they pass through the gut. I don't know. I need to check on that. That is kind of interesting. But if it's true, we're creating a kill zone then instead of restoring things. So why would we want to create this kill zone and wipe out the seed bed when we're trying to have a national park and native ecosystem?
I got to tell you,
corporate management is always about killing. That's what they create, kill zones. It's always that. It's chainsaws kill forests and cattle kill wildfire danger by trampling pastures and meadows. I mean, that's killing. This is what they do.
I wanted to take matters into my own hands instead of just going by what they said, conduct my own experiment. So I started collecting goat poop and seeing what plants would grow from it. And one day I just stopped and said, what the hell am I doing? Because not because I'm picking up poop. I do that all the time. Because I was picking the goat poop up from a blanket of invasive plant seeds. Like they did. I mean, it was irrelevant. There's so many invasive plant seeds on the ground after the goats go through that I was like, what am I doing? The invasive plants are coming back no matter what, regardless of whether or not the goat poop is responsible for them. But the goat poop does provide the nitrogen for the seeds that are still there.
Yeah. I'm going to have to probably go in a minute because my battery on my phone's going to run out. But, I have a friend who has a yard up in Nevada, and she's trying to restore it. And I'm such a believer in this. You take the long, slow, patient approach instead of helicoptering everything with herbicides, right? Or getting this army of chainsaws. It's not a big yard, but she has cheatgrass coming up. And she's like, it's like one of our brome grasses in the seashore, an annual from Eurasia, shallow roots. And then she has these natural, beautiful sagebrush and flowers and bunch grasses just coming up from the seed bed. She didn't even plant them. And so I love her. She goes out there every time it's her cabin. She takes scissors, and she's been told this by the experts that when the cheatgrass comes up and then it seeds, the little seed head, if you scissor that and then put it in a plastic bag, it won't come up again. You've just removed the seeds. Now, I'm not saying we do this in 17,000 acres of the seashore, right? But I love that approach where is that really, so bad to go do that? Maybe if you had a large group of people and you have a tiny little area you want to start restoring.
I wonder,
it's just little methods like that
you need to find a labor force, maybe immigrants, I don't know, that are looking for work because they're recently out of work because they're no longer working in the cattle industry. I wonder where we could get these workers, and they'd be willing to work for low wages and be treated like cow poop by the ranchers used to. I wonder where we could find labor that could be put to better purpose, helping the land rather than grazing it down to nothing. And last little quip I have for today, you should each, when you write your next book, Skylar's is Picking Up Goat Poop. That's the name of his book. And Laura's is I Married a Park Ranger.
Right.
Hey guys, I just threw the link up, one of the many videos Laura and I did, and if I don't say so myself, it's very informative as we walk through Point Reyes, and Laura explains why the native plants are good, and you can actually have the visual to go along with what she's saying.
Maybe, Skylar, when you post this in 20-30 minutes, usually after the show, you put it up usually within the hour so people can watch this rebroadcast, of course. You could put that as an active link in the comments section of your YouTube channel. And everybody watching, well, I guess if you're watching after the fact at this point now. This is on Watching Humans. Laura Cunningham, California Director of the Western Watersheds Project. You can support her work at westernwatersheds.org. I'm sorry, your website again, please? westernwatersheds.org.
Westernwatersheds.org.
Yeah, so you can support them, and they're a fantastic organization. And despite what the cattle ranchers say, which is they're millionaires with their wealthy donors, oh, how they wish. It just cracks me up, the pot calling the kettle black, as they say. Thanks, Laura, so much.
Laura, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, thanks, guys. Always good chatting with you about this. You do really good work. Thank you.
And we look forward to having you back. We really tried hard to stay on topic and barely got through those 3 topics. So we'll always have more to talk about.
Jim Coda is going to give us, he's going to give me a 5 out of 10 this time, as opposed to a 2 out of 10 for keeping my mouth shut and letting you actually give information, which Jim wants, because, he's that kind of a mind. I want information.
All right, everyone. We will see you next Tuesday.